Having a great project like this to do with your kids is a gift to each other. We've been working on this project for a year now, and I'm glad that we've taken the time to do it right. We've got the 2 pontoons finished and filled with foam, we've got the pontoons connected, and all the deck panels made. Now it's time to get these panels connected together and get the deck leveled out. It's really important that these deck panels align flat and flush to each other before we fiberglass them together. So here I built a little wood platform that's 8 foot by 8 foot, just out of some 2x4s and some plywood. And then I've got some 4x4 posts that are helping to hold the seams down flat. I've got a heavy-duty battery sitting on top of one of the posts, as well as a can of resin, because that panel's got a little bit of a warp to it in the center, and that's going to get both of these to be very flush together. To connect them together, I first made a fiberglass peanut butter material. This is some thickened resin that has a milled fiberglass powder, along with some chopped strand that I've taken some scissors and cut up real fine and mixed it all together. So you get kind of a peanut butter texture to it, and you can use it for filling gaps and connecting things like we're doing here. I've also taken a scraping spatula, or just a spatula, and jammed in some layers of chopped strand into some of the bigger gaps, and then put peanut butter in. So basically fiberglassing in the top as much as I can, and then of course we'll ultimately flip it over and do it on the other side and make sure that that gap is thoroughly filled, and this is what's going to connect the boards together and provide the strength we're looking for in connecting our deck panels. It's the next day and the resin is set up, so I went ahead and removed all the weights that were keeping the panels flush to each other, and then used some more fiberglass resin and material to fill in a little bit more of the gaps between the panels. After sanding that first layer of resin, there were still some gaps, so I made up another batch of thickened resin and went ahead and filled those gaps in, and then made sure that my filler was just a little bit high or proud of the surrounding panels. That way I had room to go ahead and sand it down flush, which I've done here. Some final sanding with the 120 grit sandpaper gets this surface ready and flush for some fiberglass. And now we've added a little bit of chopped strand fiberglass to cover and blend that seam. Because I was lazy and didn't wax the boards underneath the area where I was connecting the panels, some of the fiberglass resin peanut butter material dripped down through the crack and of course adhered itself to the board. So as I separated them, a little bit of the wood came up, and now I've got a little bit of sanding work to do, but that's not a problem. The good news is that my fiberglass peanut butter mixtures were the right consistency, so they were able to flow through the cracks. Of course, they did manage to do a good job of embedding themselves into the rough plywood below, and some of the material came up, as you can see. And now it's time to sand, and this is where the belt sander really does its thing. I'm using the coarse 50 grit paper to really knock down these rough edges and grind down all of this excess material. I really want to make sure that these surfaces are flush and smooth. As you can see, it does expose lots of little gaps and areas that need to be filled, but that's just all part of the process. I'm wearing a dust mask by 3M that's rated for fiberglass particles for sanding specifically, and I've got gloves on. It's important to wear safety gear for something like this because this is some nasty material. A fresh belt on the belt sander, and it makes quick work of all this rough material. It does generate a lot of dust. So once it's cleaned off, you get a really good idea of how much more work is still left. And here you can see there's still little gaps and pits and areas in the material that needs to be filled in. One of the things I also found out is because of a big rainstorm we have, some of this material that you can see in the center of the image is a little bit wet. So I've been hitting that with the heat gun, and now it's time to get ready to go ahead and fiberglass it in. After filling in this gap with some more fiberglass peanut butter, it's time to get out the belt sander and sand. This is the bottom side of the panel, so sanding it perfectly smooth is not required here. I'm just trying to knock down all the high areas so that when I fiberglass over this, I've got a nice smooth surface to work with. This type of sanding creates lots of dust, so make sure to use a dust mask and gloves and clean up as you go along. Make sure to clean all the dust off really good before you do any fiberglassing. I wanted to be able to lay down some fiberglass right away, so I used the heat gun to dry the area that I just wiped off with a cloth. The fiberglass peanut butter has already done a great job of joining these panels together, but I go ahead and lay down some 1708 material for good measure. And because this is the underside and it's also going to be covered up with other materials, this area will not be seen, and so I just went ahead and used some scraps that I have to go ahead and create one contiguous piece that connected this all together. Since the first two panels have created one nice flat area, I went ahead and decommissioned this little wood platform and we used the wood elsewhere. So to get started with the second half of the deck panel, we go ahead and take the two panels and put them on top of the first half that we've created, and then we're going to use the 4x4 posts like we did before to go ahead and help level out those seams. Sure is a good thing I didn't recycle those old car batteries yet, because they came in real handy for help leveling out these panels. To protect the finished panels below during the layup, we taped down some garbage bags, which we previously tested and found to be resistant to the resin. We lay up the top sides first because this is the most cosmetic side, and I want to really make sure that these panels are flush and smooth where the joint is. Gave it a couple of days to cure, and then we went ahead and flipped over the panel so that we can start working on the other side. These panels are now a little over 200 pounds, so it's a two-person job to do this properly. When you do a project like this, you get better as you go along, and here you can see that my fiberglass peanut butter material was a better consistency, and I got a much better flow-through rate all the way through the panel. This time there were just a few areas that need to be filled in. Here you can see the unusual pattern that the plastic bag left as the resin came through. As before, I just used some scrap 1708 material to fiberglass this over. I did one skinny layer underneath it and then a thicker layer overhead. And then I didn't bother to use any dye, as this is all going to be incorporated into the panels underneath. It's all going to be covered over. None of this will be visible. This is a good example of why I like to retain all of the little scrap pieces that are of decent size as I do the job, because they come in handy for so many little projects like this. The next two steps are huge. First, we've got to connect these two half panels, level them out, and then second, we've got to get them attached to the hull and create a boat out of this thing. There's going to be a lot of foam that's going to go between, as well as solid supports, and then everything gets fiberglass to everything all over again to connect it all and create one solid superstructure that's foam filled and super strong. If I can get these next two steps finished by New Year's Eve, I think at that point we can officially start calling it a boat.